Received numerous emails and correspondence about this matter, and I really came along here to educate myself as well as everything else. But having listened and read the correspondence I received, it strikes me that we're in a new situation here, that we have an EU directive which sets out various standards that titles Irish persons to call themselves an architect. So I think you have to differentiate here between those who have been practicing for a number of years and have attained standards that are acceptable to the normal person, and starting afresh from now onwards. And I think that's the only way you can deal with a situation like this, that you allow standards, taking into account when it wasn't possible for people 30 years ago to attain a standard of education that is now required. And I think we very, very often forget this. I grew up in a generation where you had to pay fees to go to secondary school. Yeah. And it was a struggle for people in Ireland in those days to get second-level education. To get third-level education in my early years was an extraordinary thing. You had to come from a very elite group of people in this country, and that's a fact of life. And thanks be to goodness, things have moved on, that we've got to a stage where not alone have we free second-level education, but we have free third-level education to a certain degree, except that the imposition of registration fees is another excuse for charging a fee. But I hope that someday we'll be able to deal with that matter. But things are different. And therefore, you can, whatever standard you're going to set for the future, because people have the opportunity, fair enough, and let us conform to what is the standard in Europe. The standard in Europe is set out in a directive. But we have to deal with a situation that exists at the present time because of the circumstances that we as a country experienced in the past. And you can't throw people out in the street and prevent them from practicing simply because, at that time, and yet they are as good a standard as they would be if they had attained a degree. So I think, as other speakers have said, I think common sense has to prevail here. And common sense, in the real sense of the word, not to be setting barriers that are impossible to attain to keep people out, but barriers, reasonable barriers that will ensure that the consumer has a standard of professionalism that he or she is entitled to expect. And neither should there be a barrier when it comes to fees. Now, I note that in Canada and the US, registration examination costs $1,250, and the Dutch register examination costs €3,065. Republic of Ireland, ARAE, Republic of Ireland examination is $13,500. And a technical assessment of architects is $6,500. Now, that was the information that was supplied to me. I don't know whether that's 100% correct, because I don't profess to be fully au fait with all of that. But I'm just raising the point that, if we're going to be genuine about this, set standards for the future, because people have the opportunity of going to college to get to a certain standard. To register, have a reasonable fee that is standard in Europe. We are members of the European Union, and the last thing you want is all of these things to be ending up in the European Court, which is likely to happen. After that, it's, as I said, it's basic common sense, and I hope that either through this committee or through the minister, or the minister being called in here to also listen to your committee, Chairman, would be a good idea. So thank you very much.
Yeah, before we call on the delegation to answer the questions, I think some of the questions have been posed which I intended to ask myself, but maybe the committee is struggling with, as you can see, coming to a conclusion to solve this problem. So maybe if somebody could find out why are the fees for RIAI so excessive? And everybody seems to be asking, including the government members here, why was the grandfather clause not in the Act? So maybe you would help us in our deliberations in what we have to do or what we have to decide to do hereafter as a committee, if we could get clarification on that. And is it the view that you're looking for this committee to prevail upon the Minister to introduce regulations or guidelines to enable long-practicing building professions to become registered without the excessive fees? Would that be a fair analysis of what you expect this committee to do, or which we will have to decide afterwards? But in any case, you have plenty of questions without mine to deal with, so I'll call maybe on the architect first to respond to the members' questions, and then we'll proceed to the rest.
Just say 10 minutes each. Just say 10 minutes each for replies.
10 minutes?
Each for replies.
Yeah, about 10 minutes each for replies to that, if you can.
Okay, the architects first.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've tried to keep track of the various questions. I think there's a fundamental point that that might help take us forward, and that is that, in my mind, there is not a proper distinction made between a mature entry system into the profession, which is for people who are partly self-trained, partly academically trained, but have taken a kind of latter-day apprenticeship route. That there can be examinations for such people where their practical training is credited against alternative types of examination, and that type of mature entry procedure for the profession is something that can be ongoing, and it's actually proposed in the Act under this thing called the PRAE. Where the difficulty lies is that the alternative route, which is supposed to be for grandfathers, is neither one nor the other. It's neither a grandfather clause, which other legislation contains, including the 2010 Finance Bill or Act. There's a provision for existing forms of contract which don't comply with the Act to be allowed to continue. We need. If you're prepared to accept that there are people who have established the right to trade as architects already, and that the goalposts are being moved and so on, and that they should be measured in some special fashion, and then we move on. In addition, there is a mature entry route, which involves an examination of a certain type, which concurs with the EU standards for the interests of a level playing field, then that resolves the matter. But expecting the grandfathers to jump the new hurdles, which are designed for academically trained people who have actually spent 5 years at university. So their focus is different. We're not saying we're not as good as them. In fact, we can see that practically trained architects can often can excel. Michael Collins, Michael Scott, I beg your pardon, you have here. There's a Japanese architect the Institute invited over here, Tadeo, yeah, to speak to his own members. Frank Lloyd Wright. The route to professionalism through practical training is completely valid. Unfortunately, it's now out of step. So we're asking for that to be recognised, and for there to be a provision which does not put us out in the streets because the goalposts have moved. We think we are not, for example, demanding that grandfathers be recognised in Europe, because that's one of the issues that the Institute is worried about. This level playing field, this conflict of standards, and so on. We're asking to stay where we are. we're not trying to be elevated beyond what we've reached already. We're saying we are completely recognised in the state as architects. Don't take that away from us. And I think that a grandfather clause can be constructed which will satisfy that without conflicting with the aspirations about a Europe-wide level playing field, notwithstanding the fact that the directive, the European directive, does not make any demands about how the profession is conducted in the state. It specifically distances itself from that.
Thank you. Mr. Gabry.
I'm slightly surprised